My name is Clayton Demain. I'm a student journalist, and I wanted to do a story about the Roman Catholic Church in my region. Cardinal Collins, the former Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Toronto, has recently retired, and Pope Francis has appointed a new bishop to take his place. Catholics around the world are wondering what is going to happen with the traditional Latin Mass after new regulations were announced from the Vatican. I had the pleasure of interviewing Neil McCarthy, the Director of Communications for the Archdiocese of Toronto. So without further ado, here is that interview.
It's an exciting time, and it's historic, right? This only happens, usually every 15, 20 years or so. And so we got a new shepherd coming, and Bishop Leo's from Montreal originally. And so, yeah, I've been spending a lot of time talking to him in the last few weeks because part of my job is not only the media side of it, but our office is organizing the installation. And so, there's a mass, but there's also a big party for hundreds of people that you got to put together guest lists and things like that. So the practical side of things, I'm very much working on, but he's also someone who's a new bishop. He's a young guy. He hasn't been a bishop very long, and he's from Quebec, so he's coming to a different part of Canada, and he doesn't have ties or connections to the Archdiocese of Toronto, so it'll be a brand new experience for him, and a new experience for us too.
When he gets installed at St. Michael's Basilica, will there be an event that's open to the public?
Yeah, the actual installation is right now it's looking like it's going to be an invitation only event, not because we're just trying to be exclusive, but we only have a certain amount of space in the cathedral, and when you have an archdiocese where you have 400 priests, almost half your seating is taken up already just with the priests. And so that's part of the joy of working on guest lists right now. But it'll all be live streamed. Salt and Light Catholic Television will televise it. Mainstream media will likely pick up portions of it. And, we're also looking at right now, can we accommodate people who may want to be outside, putting up a screen or getting audio, things like that. So the new bishop will also do a series of regional masses because of the geography of the archdiocese being so vast. So within about the first month of his time here, he'll do a mass of welcome in the east, so likely in Pickering area, west probably Mississauga, in the north in Barrie, and then one in the we call the central region, Toronto proper, and North York probably. So we're working on planning all those events. So the first few months will be a lot of welcome celebrations for him, which is great.
Can we expect Bishop Leo to be a more progressive bishop?
I think he's probably, the interesting thing is he's only been a bishop for 6 months. So he doesn't have a huge track record in terms of time that he's been a bishop to this point. But I think, it's funny because in the Catholic Church, you talk about progressive and conservative, and, people would generally identify the Catholic Church as a more traditional or conservative religion. So it's like within a more conservative religion, what's the left side of that or the right side of that? So I think, in talking to him just in the last few weeks, his focus is on serving the people. And, that's something that Pope Francis has often talked about, is the bishops need to have the smell of the sheep. They're caring for the flock, but they need to be connected to the flock. They can't be disconnected, living in the corporate, office and, at the cathedral and isolated from people. So I think, at least the impression I get is he wants to be connected to people. He wants to meet them where they are. And that includes, the people who come to Mass regularly, and then people who, are not engaged in their faith. And so he's the bishop for everyone. And I think, at least in the initial conversations I've had with him, he wants to reflect that and be there for the people, and just see what Toronto is all about and where he can contribute to bringing people closer to their faith.
So you did just mention people that are maybe not as engaged in their faith as they once were. How can the Archdiocese moving forward re-engage some of those Catholics who maybe have strayed away from the faith?
I think it's Cardinal Collins, who's the outgoing Archbishop, always talked about, you want to build a bridge, touch the heart, and then share your view, share your teaching, your belief. And so sometimes there's a tendency for some people to want to give the teaching of the faith and telling people why, you're not living a good life, and you're going to hell if you don't do these three things. And they start with the teaching instead of building the bridge and touching the heart. And so I think Bishop Leo is going to be someone who continues to build on that kind of example that Cardinal Collins has said of building the bridge and touching the heart, developing a relationship with people wherever they are at in their journey, and then talking about, hey, for me, my faith inspires me, or it strengthens me in this way or that way. But it's building friendships and having dialogue. And I think that's what we need to do. We have to remember that it's a busy world we live in, and people have all sorts of reasons why they can say, I'm too busy to go to church, or too busy to pray, or have that as an important part of my life. But there's moments. What are the moments where we meet in that journey of life to say, okay, if you encounter someone who has a positive experience and feels affirmed, with someone who's a faith leader or someone who's a person of faith, that can make a huge impact. I always think of like a wedding or a funeral or a baptism, things that people would come to that maybe they normally wouldn't attend church, but they're coming to a wedding or a funeral. And I always think those are opportunities for us to show what the church can be for people. And if they have a really positive experience just for that 45 minutes they're at a wedding, then they might go back and say, you know what, maybe I'm going to give this another try. Or if I haven't been to church before, I'm going to check this out. And so it's the simple things. It's not the big, there's lots of programs you can work on, and we'll do this or do that. But I think it's also building relationships with people and meeting them where they are.
Cardinal Collins, he specialized in the Book of Revelation. Do we know what Bishop Leo, if he has a favorite book of the Bible?
I haven't asked him that yet, but I mean, he's someone who has had an interesting journey. He's someone who's been a pastor at the local parish, but he's also been a teacher at seminaries for people who are studying for the priesthood, religious life. He's traveled in different parts of the world in the diplomatic corps. So he's worked in different parts of the world in what they call the nunciture's office, basically the ambassadors from the Vatican to different countries. And then he was the general secretary for the Canadian bishops. So he worked in a more administrative capacity, coordinating activities of the Canadian bishops. So a really interesting background. He's also someone who has they call it a love, a Marian charism, and so a love of Mary, mother of Jesus. And so in the conversations I've had with him, that's been, let's say a Hail Mary before we start embarking on this huge project in front of us. So focused in prayer, very Marian focus there. So I think that'll be a beautiful blessing for us. And then we're going to learn about him, and he's going to learn about us. But I mean, to become a bishop, usually you're a pretty smart cookie and someone who's done some really great things in your life, but also he's a very humble guy. He's not I'm the bishop, you're not the bishop, and it's very warm and thoughtful. So my first impressions have been of a really thoughtful person, and I think as a shepherd, that's what we want, that's what we need.
What are some of the good things that you think the church has done over the last few years that you think it should continue to do, and with the new bishop?
Well, I think again, being present to people at their best and at their worst, right? That's what the church tends to be. Is we're a safe haven for people, hopefully, to come and pray or to be with us on the greatest days of their life, if they're getting married, or celebration of anniversaries and high moments. And then in those toughest moments, when you've lost a loved one, when you're feeling alone, you have the church, you have your faith there. And so being present is so important. And through the pandemic, that was something that a lot of people, there was a lot of loneliness and a lot of isolation for people who were, forced to be restricted in terms of where they could go and what they could do. And, for churches, we had to look at doing things a little bit differently because of the restrictions. And so, we had parishes, churches where they would call every member of the community and checking in on them. They would have people going out and just, knocking on a door and leaving a meal for a senior or someone who is isolated. So that idea of being present for others, I think, is a really important one. And that, I mean, the church is that's something we've always been strong at, reaching out to those in need through charity and social services. So whether it's soup kitchens or single parents or people with mental health issues or people who are living on the street and calling the street home. If you're suffering in our community, chances are not just the Catholic Church, but many different faith communities are there to help out and often fill the gaps that government funding or whatever isn't providing. So that ministry of presence, I think, is one, and openness to invite new people in and say, hey, you're always welcome. I think that's something that is always a challenge for us, even more so coming out of COVID, because people's habits changed over a couple of years of isolation, and so to welcome people back to the church and invite new people to join us again.
Where are some areas do you think the church can improve in the coming years?
One of the things that we need to focus on is not just the people who are coming week to week. Obviously, we want to support and nurture them, but also not to forget the people that have fallen away from the church for whatever reason. And just to remember the impact that an invitation can have. There's something very powerful when you say to someone, can you join me for this? I'd like you to come to this service or this event or whatever the case may be, or I need your help. Could you help me with, welcoming people at the back of the church, or could you, help with your financial, knowledge to help us with a budget that we're working on at the church, or you're a great animator. Could you help motivate some people to volunteer for this outreach activity we're involved in? So, I think doing those kinds of things well is something that we need to keep working at. Some parishes and churches do it really well, some not as well. And so there's energy when you get people involved in doing those things. And I think sometimes too, the stereotype that people have the church about the Catholic Church is it's just about a set of rules. These are the do's and don'ts. You can't do this and you can do this, you can't do this, and more focused on what you can't do. And I think what we need to show people is that it's not about a set of rules. It's about setting the bar high for ourselves and how we treat other people and how we look at our own life. But to say that there is an opportunity there for everyone to be welcome and to be valued in our community. And I think that's always something we can improve on and work on. So lots of homework to do, but there's a lot of great things, but certainly things we can always do better.
There is a hot topic in the church right now as well, the traditional Latin Mass.
Hmm.
So how are some of the restrictions that were announced, like, how is that going to practically happen in the Archdiocese of Toronto?
It's an interesting one because in the Archdiocese of Toronto, actually, we do have, I think it's 2 or 3 parishes where they do have the Latin Mass celebrated, and it's kind of been, I won't say regulated, but it's been approved, and it's been, there's dialogue there with those who are fans of celebrating more traditional Latin Mass. I think what's happened in some parts of the world is it's almost like the local bishop has been saying, oh, I don't want you to do this. And they're saying, oh, you don't want us to do this. It's going to embolden us even more. We're going to want to do this. And it's almost like underground, this kind of thing, where for us, I think the conversation has been very open, and there's been a place available for people who, feel connected to the traditional rite. And so I'm not sure, I'm not a canon church lawyer, but it feels to me like there won't be a huge impact in the way things look locally here. I think what the church and what the Vatican was trying to do with this is we always want to be in communion and together as part of a family. And so it's the idea of, when you're with your own family and you say, we want to have dinner around the table together. And then someone says, no, I want to have dinner downstairs. And somebody else says, I want to be in my room. And then we're separated from one another. And so it's trying to come together and say, let's recognize that the way that people, their spirituality may be a little different in terms of some people like a more charismatic expression of their faith. Some people like a more kind of quiet and personal expression of faith. Some people like something more traditional. Some people like more modern. So there's room in the family for everyone. It's just trying to find a way to do it where it's not combative, where it's actually not trying to say we're better than you. and the way you do it is wrong, and the way, so it's trying to work together on that. And you see that. I mean, we have 225 Catholic churches in the Archdiocese. You go to mass is mass, so we follow the same rite, but the music is a little different here. And here they've got a choir, and here they've got one cantor, here they've got a guitar, here they've got, a full wind orchestra to help with that. So it can vary. But I think the idea is to try to be unified as much as possible, and not to divide, and to try to recognize that the divisions from within are sometimes the ones that are the most painful, and it's not helpful for anyone to kind of go down that road.
You don't foresee the Latin Mass going, like having an outright ban over the next couple years in Toronto, in the Archdiocese of Toronto, rather?
Yeah, and I'm not the one that would, like, there's a chancellor of spiritual affairs that's involved in that with the bishops a lot more than I am, so I'm not as familiar with the practical steps around that. But the like Latin is still sung and is part of the 2023 Roman Missal, right? When people celebrate Mass today. Now, the idea of the traditional Latin Mass, where the priest is not facing the congregation, the entire Mass is in Latin, that sort of thing is obviously not the norm in parishes. But I'd like to think there's still space for a combination, or at least an appreciation of both. But in terms of the practicality of that, I'm not as in my area of public relations and communications, it's just we're not as connected in terms of the decision making on how that looks, practically speaking. So my understanding is, again, we still have that a few parishes where the Latin Mass is celebrated, and it's working well. And it's obviously something with this decision from the Vatican where it needs to be monitored, but there is a lot of autonomy given to the local bishop, which is not unusual. That happens with many things within the Roman Catholic Church, where the local bishop has the discretion to sort of determine how that's going to be implemented in their own local community.
Awesome. And I suppose finally, what is your favorite book of the Bible?
You know what? It's funny. There's a reading from the Corinthians that is it's just a line. I was talking to my daughter about it the other night, and you usually hear it on Ash Wednesday, which very recently we've just moved into Lent, and that's "Be ambassadors for Christ." And I always love hearing that reading. It's given usually only once a year, but the idea of all of us being ambassadors for our faith. And in the people we meet, we often talk about being the hands and face of Jesus. When we meet people on the street who are angry or upset or homeless, what would Jesus do when they encounter these folks? So I like, and I also like the parables, right, which we hear in the Gospels of the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the stories that Jesus used to kind of apply messages and principles to, did you hear about the rich fool, this person who wasted all of the talents that they had, those kinds of things. I like those practical stories that connect me with my own life. So yeah, the Corinthians one is just the one that always sticks to me on a quote, but the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are like where our faith comes alive. I love hearing those stories.
Awesome. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think it's great. I really appreciate that you've, found it interesting to reach out to, someone involved in communications and public relations with the church. It's a really unique kind of work that we do. And so I'm glad I've had a chance to share some of that with you, and certainly wish you all the best with what comes next for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Appreciate
Clay.
that.